Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's Sensophilia Sparring Partners webinar. Is Wi-Fi becoming more like 5G, and is 5G becoming more like Wi-Fi? Our speakers today are Claus Hetting, CEO and Chairman of Wi-Fi Now, and Monica Paolini, Principal at Sensophilia. I'm Kendra Chamberlain, and I will be moderating our webinar today. In Sparring Partners webinars, we watch our debaters discuss a topic live on video. We would like to encourage our audience to participate in the conversation. Please share your comments and questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. All comments are visible to all participants, so please keep the conversation polite and respectful. There will be no Q&A at the end, but our speakers will do their best to address questions as they go along and as they become relevant to the topics being discussed. So feel free to drop your questions in anytime. And one final reminder, as tempting as it is, please do not use the chat function. Our speakers do not monitor the chat function, but feel free to share your comments in the Q&A button instead. And with that, I'll hand it over to Monica.
Kendra, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you all for signing in. And Claus, thanks for being with us today. It's really a pleasure. I think last time we met, it was at a conference having nice drinks at the roof party. Is that right?
In San Francisco, it was a chipset vendor launch event, right? And we were at the roof. Right. And we were at the roof garden somewhere in San Francisco. It was great. That is the last time we met. And it does feel like about approximately 100 years ago. I'm not sure exactly when it was. It might have been 2016-ish, right?
Yes, maybe. Yeah. Yes. It was definitely pre-COVID a long time ago. Definitely. And we should never complain about our jobs.
No.
It's anyway, so great admirer of Claus, and today we're going to talk about the latest in Wi-Fi. And the reason for that is that because we often take Wi-Fi so much for granted. You know, it's just a matter of, it's like having running water at home. You don't talk about that. You just but today we want to talk about, what's new and what's happening. Right. But before we get that, I'm going to get Claus to introduce himself, because I know you probably you all know him, but let's just go through the motions, and Claus, tell us who you are.
All right. So, well, my name is Claus Hetting. I'm the CEO and chairman of Wi-Fi Now, an organization that I started, I guess it's about 7 years ago now. And I've basically dedicated the past 15 years of my life to Wi-Fi. And I think of myself these days really mostly as a reporter and a facilitator, because most of my time these days I spend reporting the news and telling everybody about what's going on in the Wi-Fi industry, and also facilitating a lot of content from all the great companies that we work with, and creating events, these days also in-person events, and now online things as well, which we really enjoy doing as well. So I really most of the time have my facilitators, moderators, reporters hat on, and I occasionally do analyst things, but not as much. I kind of prefer to leave analyst type work to great people like yourself and a number of other colleagues that I have. But of course, in my capacity of being a person that talks to everybody in the Wi-Fi industry constantly, and I do have a lot of knowledge about it, and I'm happy to share it. So yeah, that's pretty much what I do these days. And of course, I am an evangelist. I am a Wi-Fi evangelist, really, ultimately, I guess, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a fantastic industry to be in. I mean, it's given me so much at the personal level, at the professional level. I've built my business around it. I just think Wi-Fi people are fantastic, and they span, Wi-Fi people span anyone from somebody who's just created basically a garage setup for captive portals. And there's a lot of small companies like that do good business like that. And right up until Intel, Qualcomm, and these giants, right? And it's great to be part of such a vibrant industry, and we want to support all of them. We think they're all great.
Yeah, it's just amazing when you think that, what is that, 22, 21 years
21 years,
long.
22 years, right, yes.
Yeah. So when the 20th anniversary came up, I thought, oh my God, this is just so long. Because when you think about a lot of, Gs in cellular, they're much shorter lifespan. And it's actually quite amazing. The lifespan, well, it's not amazing that it's so long, but it continues to evolve so much. Because usually when you have a technology that's 20 years old, it's like, you consider it legacy.
Right, that is true, and I can tell you, there's still .11n devices out there, a lot of them, right? Not necessarily always a good thing, because we'd like, they're not particularly efficient and so on, and we'd like the evolution to move on. But yes, it has been ridiculously successful, amazingly successful for the past 20 years. And to be honest with you, we've always thought with mobile, there was never really any question. There's going to be another G, right? This goes without saying. For Wi-Fi, when I first started, everything was great as well at that time. But we, like anybody else, I suppose, in a smaller industry, said, where are we going to go with this? And, what has happened, and this is really to the credit of some very, very smart people at the FCC in 2021, and including Ajit Pai, the former chairman, and a group of very, very visionary Wi-Fi veterans. Full credit, amazing credit to them, that they started this drive towards 6 gigahertz, which has, shall we say, given Wi-Fi another, I'm going to say 20 years lease on life, because that, we're going to talk about more about this, but that alone has been, we've not even started that yet.
You haven't even scratched the surface. You're absolutely right. So I, for all the audience, I just put a few links to papers, and the last one that I did is exactly on the 6 gigahertz. And the fact that you actually need it all. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that. Why do you need it all for what? Because you're just being greedy. And I think this is, I think you're right, because the 6 gigahertz is kind of a game changer for Wi-Fi, I think.
No question about it.
Because this is really going to bring it not only to residential users, which we're doing pretty well on it anyway, but I think that what really is changing is the way that the enterprise will be able to use it. So for the residential users, I see it's more, I shouldn't say more of the same, but it's like, it's just better, but we're going to be doing this pretty much the same thing. For the enterprise, is a game changer. It's not because there is more spectrum, because you can do different things with the same spectrum and the same technology.
Correct.
So that's really important.
It's super important. I would venture that both are going to be revolutionized. So here's the thing: if you think of what in fact just happened recently, this is maybe not a week ago or so, that AT&T, for example, announced they now have 20 gigabits per second fiber to the home running on their live network. It's not rolled out yet, I don't think, but this is on the production plan that it's now running. 20 gigabits per second to the home, right?
Right.
This is a staggering amount of bandwidth. And you also kind of think, and I also, start thinking, okay, goodness me, what are we going to use all that for? Right. But it's nonetheless happening, and the fiber companies are rolling it out. And I was going to say, for better or worse, I'm sure somebody will use it once it's there. This is the drive that we're on. And when you put 20 gigabits per second into a home, you're going to need, because you're not going to plug anything in pretty much, right? You're going to expect that to arrive at your device wirelessly somehow. And that is where, the new standards are going to come in, and the new spectrum is going to come in. Specifically now, we're talking about Wi-Fi 7. Of course, Wi-Fi 6E is the previous one, and that's also going strong, by the way. But Wi-Fi 7. So this is now where we're at. We can probably have an argument about, who needs that, right? There's certain things that I think are evident that there's a need for. There's a lot of gaming, for example, going on, and those kids, really want, the not just high speed, but also low latency, which is a big part of it, right? And as a premium service, perhaps, right? And there's more and more going on within the confines of the home. So I think that bandwidth will certainly not go to waste. But the truth is, in order for that bandwidth to reach you that has to be carried over Wi-Fi, and that's a big jump from maybe a few gigabits. If some homes have that, I might have it here, maybe 1 gigabit to my home, but to 10 and to 20 is an entirely new world, right? And we're gonna have to see what people are gonna come up with.
I don't think we have a problem. This is what happens every time you have a new G that you kind of see. So, you put more capacity in the system, and we can talk all day about new use cases and so on and so forth. But the thing that people find out amazingly soon, that there is more capacity and find a way to use it. So usually we think of demand as something that exists out there. It isn't. I mean, to some extent, yes. But the more capacity you have, the more use you have for it. So I'll give you one example. You might have cameras at home, but it used to be that you just don't want to put too many because that creates a problem. Now it doesn't matter. You just put them on. And then you have all this traffic that needs to be carried without you doing anything. Because I remember at some point trying to figure out how much do you need, okay? And you are the bottleneck at the end of the day. I mean, you, the user, right? Because there's just so many things. There's just so many video streams you can watch at the same time.
There's a point where you cannot consume anymore, right?
Exactly. But that's the problem, is that when you start having cameras and any device like that, then the amount that you consume sort of personally expands dramatically, because a lot of the things you do require a live and ongoing uplink, downlink, whatever. So that's the thing. But that is,
and the IoT piece is extremely important for this, as you said. And I think we'll see a lot of that. And Steve Jobs famously, said, "Don't ask the consumer what they want, because they will know what they want when they see it." And most of them haven't seen the latest thing that we're going to offer them, right? So you know what I mean? So it's actually really, the reason why I say that is it's very, very hard to predict you're bringing some excellent examples, but it's very hard to predict what this bandwidth is going to be used for, but I'm absolutely sure it will be used.
Yes.
I have no question about it.
We know that much. So that is important. But one thing that I recently learned, and I'm still investigating in more detail, is that to actually, because there is for 6 gigahertz, like in Europe, there is a question of should you have it all unlicensed or half licensed and half unlicensed. And so one argument said, well, let's just be nice to everybody, we just split it. Well, splitting it might reduce the efficiency of using Wi-Fi in the 6 gigahertz, because what it seems to be the case is that if you have more bandwidth, then you can manage the spectrum more efficiently. And what that does is not only you have more bandwidth, which is always desirable, of course, but it allows Wi-Fi to be more deterministic, because you have it. And so the question is that it's not just you have more spectrum, but that spectrum can be used in better ways for
better ways. Yeah. So let me just respond in 2 ways to that. And these are 2 incredibly important points. It is true that Europe is different, at least for the time being, than the United States, in that Europe has only allocated or released, however you want to put it, approximately half. I think it's 490 actually megahertz. As opposed to US that has released 1.2 gigahertz, right, of 6 gigahertz spectrum, which doesn't make sense, but it goes up to 7.2. That's why we say.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. The increase is amazing. It's unheard of. I mean,
unheard of. Can you imagine? I sometimes say, can you imagine if the 5G mobile folks were handed over that much spectrum? They would party like there was no tomorrow. I mean, it's unheard of.
Actually, let me say that. No. Let me say. So let's say that you give it to them for free. Then you'd have to deploy. You don't have them. I mean, they would actually be really expensive to deploy. So actually, it would be good, but it was something that they wouldn't do necessarily anything in the short term, because like, what would we?
No, it would be exactly. It would be
with Wi-Fi. Is not a problem because everybody buys it, and
that's right.
You don't have a problem. Anyway, so go ahead. Like,
I was just going to say about the discrepancy between Europe and it's not just Europe, by the way. There are other countries that have only allocated half and whatever. And it's a big, fortunately, big chunk of countries. The US, Brazil, US, of course, number one. Started this, and then Brazil, South Korea, I think Saudi Arabia. I mean, there's a long list.
And then you have China, where it's the other way around.
Well, that's the other way around, and that's another good.
That's
here's the-
home licensed.
Correct. So at least for now. So
Yeah.
the issue is that there's going to be, I really think of this as a digital divide. I think there's going to be a digital divide, and that digital divide is going to run along the Atlantic, because in the US, you're going to have, I have to be careful what I say, but you're going to have, well, you're certainly going to have twice now, I think it's 7 320 megahertz channels in your home, for example. And that is going to get you multiple gigahits for every room of your house. And this is going to happen. As I said, we already saw the AT&T 20 gig to your home, right? You're going to have gigabits in every room of your house at some point in the US, right?
Yeah.
In Europe, you're going to have much less than that. And I think that's less than half of that, right? At least for now, this is what it looks like. And there are people, including myself, that are advocating that Europe should change the rules and whatnot. And of course, we want that to happen. But right now, there is a huge difference between what's going to happen in the US with 6 gigahertz and what is going to happen in Europe, for example. And I think Europe is going to miss out in a big way. But here's the thing about this, this story about possibly having some of the 6 gigahertz band befall IMT, meaning for mobile use. Here's what's complicated and will probably fairly soon be the issue that makes them drop the entire thing, at least in my estimation. You see, the band is not open, right? The band is occupied by microwave links that are used by utilities and so on. The 6 gigahertz band I'm talking about, right? So whatever you put in that band will need a mechanism to share, and or it will need, which we have in Wi-Fi now, in you know, FCC credit. Or
and that's what Wi-Fi does all the time.
Right, exactly. Wi-Fi does it all the time anyway, but it needs a mechanism to share. It also needs to be low enough power, right, that it will not interfere. Now, you know, that all that stuff has been studied to the death, right, by the FCC as a preparation to releasing this, and it's been studied to death in many other countries as well. So we know that if the power level is such and such relatively low, it's not going to interfere with anything that's already there. Now, how are you going to manage that in mobile? This is the question. So I don't see how that can be done. Let's say the approach is then you have to vacate, you know, a piece of the 6 gig.
You cannot.
It will never happen. Where would you put them? Even if you did, where would you put all those in terms of frequencies?
Well, it's just more complicated because there are multiple users and there are different users in different countries, and you want to harmonize it to the extent. But to me, the other argument is that if you make it unlicensed, you're not going to tell operators that they cannot use it. They can use the spectrum with the. So it's like you're not telling them you cannot use it. And I don't know in Europe, but in the US, operators are using LIA quite a lot. They do not advertise it because there is no point in it. Well, it's like why should they? But they're actually using it, and so. No, and because there is no problem with interference, wherever they need, and there is so much spectrum, wherever they want to, they can go ahead and use it.
Right, exactly.
So it's not exclusive. They're not excluded.
No, exactly. You're absolutely right. And I don't think there's really any good argument other than, you know, for waiting to release the rest of the band to Wi-Fi. In my view, I think it's kind of like a delay tactic. I even think probably most of the mobile people know that they probably can't work in that band anyway, and it's not commercially viable, even if they add something that might work a little bit like Wi-Fi or whatever they're coming up with. So I think it's kind of like a delay tactic maybe or something. And in any case, I think in terms of productivity and like socioeconomic impact and all of that, and you know, the Europeans are not going to be behind, right? And I don't think that. I mean, as a European, I don't like that situation, obviously.
Yeah, but it's not decided yet, so that's not, you know.
No, I mean, there's work going on. Let me put it this way: nothing is ever fixed yet, but behind in the sense that it hasn't been allocated yet, at least. I know by the way, there is a study item in CPT to study the viability of the rest, so to speak, of the 6 gigahertz band for Wi-Fi and so on. So that has been established. So hopefully there's a path there that is starting. But for sure, I mean, as it stands, there's a big difference, a really big difference.
Well,
And,
the other thing, the other
no,
thing is,
go ahead.
you know, from a mobile operator point of view, it might actually be better that it's unlicensed, because it's a huge opportunity to carry traffic. Because right now, and we were talking about this before, most of the, we know that most of the traffic from your mobile phone, whatever device you have, goes through Wi-Fi. We know that, and that's for the operator, it's a free lunch in a way, you know, because they don't pay for it, which is perfectly good, you know. But so I would say that the viability of the mobile business is, you know, it's based on the fact that there is Wi-Fi. If there was no Wi-Fi, it would be so expensive. In fact, we would have to pay so much more to carry the traffic. Absolutely. So it's kind of like it's a share. So from a mobile operator point of view, given that it's be so hard to build a network in 6 gigahertz, if I were a mobile operator, I'd say, just let do Wi-Fi, because then I can make sure that I get the mobile part covered better.
Absolutely. And so here's the thing. I remember way back when, you know, one of the arguments was that, imagine, or the thought experience, I should say, imagine that if the 80% of the traffic that runs over Wi-Fi actually moved over to the mobile networks, it would be game over, right? And they would, first of all, it would obviously crash, but you'd have to, you know, build 4 times the capacity that you have, or 5, or whatever. I mean, it's a non-starter. It's way too expensive. It's a non-starter. Everything would crash, and they would make no money. So in fact, yes, it's now kind of there is a synergy there, right? There's something to be said for that also as a mobile operator, that they should be, basically, as you said, they should be happy that it's there, right?
Yeah, which is, you know, at the beginning, they were all like, mobile operators were all worried about Wi-Fi. And then they're like, hold on, this is actually good for us.
Not bad for you when it comes down to it.
Right.
Exactly.
Anyway, so, yeah, we have a couple of questions here from Pasquale. Yeah. And so let's go through the first one. Pasquale says, while Wi-Fi is used for both leisure and productivity, mobile is used predominantly for leisure, like TikTok, Spotify. Should policymakers think about which technology enables citizens and business to increase the country GDP, and therefore consider this when discussing spectrum option? I would say that it's both Wi-Fi and mobile that are used for leisure and productivity in different ways. So I do not know. It'd be interesting to know. But, you know, like with mobile, even if you use it like for a map, some people use it for work. So it's not just you know, or you use your phone for. So I would say, certainly you should consider the country GDP, but it's actually, I would say, it's also hard to link GDP to usage.
Yes.
So I think that, you know, yes. Okay. What I would say is that you need to think about increasing GDP more than the revenues to the country. So when you allocate spectrum.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's like, you know.
I agree. There are studies, by the way, Wi-Fi Alliance, if you go to wi-fi.org or national, there are studies made that model you know, the socioeconomic impact in terms of the economic value, not the cash value, but the overall economic value of Wi-Fi. And you can go and look at those numbers, and I think they're reasonably accurate. And you can go look. The numbers are, you know, frankly, depending on the, you know, overall in the trillions, right? And then for each country, it's a number. But there are vast sums involved. It's real, it's measurable, and we're talking about trillions of dollars. But let me just comment on Pasquale's question. Question. Yeah, Wi-Fi also has some relatively invisible uses, in the sense that it's used much more than we commonly, you know, have any knowledge of. For example, in industry, I mean, there's all kinds of places where Wi-Fi, or some, shall we say, some proprietary version of it, is used for you know, control of some sort in some sort of industry and so on. And we don't really see that so much. I mean, we're used to seeing, you know, what's going on the phone, but Wi-Fi is very much, and I used to call it that all the time, like a Swiss Army knife, right? Because it's designed to give you a certain number of things, but it's not defined all the way up through the stack. While mobile is a service, Wi-Fi is a technology. You can think of it this way, and can be adapted to umpteen different use cases. And there's still new use cases coming out And there will be even more as we get into the new spectrum and so on, right? So this we also have to think of when we talk about Wi-Fi. I mean, I know there's big industrial corporations that use it internally, that build systems around it, and that they perhaps don't even, you know, it's not a commercial thing, it's something they use internally. But this is what keeps a lot of their manufacturing, whatever else it is, running, right? So
actually, I'm gonna go one step further, okay? Because this is something that I kind of, you know, it's not like I love Wi-Fi, but I love 5G and everybody. So that's not the issue. But when we talk about IoT, okay, we think of IoT like 5G IoT. We think about 5G use cases. Most of the 5G use cases can be supported by Wi-Fi. IoT, if you think about who is doing IoT today, it's 90% Wi-Fi, if not more. I mean, I'm just saying 90% just to throw a number. Because so we think about all of that. I mean, if you think about your home, how many devices do you have that use Wi-Fi? And again, you don't necessarily see it because you set it up and off it goes.
Right.
Maybe some is Bluetooth, but you know, there is a lot of IoT. You talk to airports and they might complain about Wi-Fi, but that's all they use. I mean, no, that they use also other stuff. I'm sorry, but a lot of the stuff, your luggage is often using Wi-Fi, and it doesn't work very well because there is congestion. The reason why it's congested is because it's so successful that there is so much use.
For sure,
And you would have the same problem with cellular if they just let everybody use it.
Oh, sure. This is the thing. Absolutely.
So it's not, you know. So we have to think about so you know, what we call the 5G use cases is actually nothing new in Wi-Fi land.
No, it's no. Many of those, when you sometimes I laugh a little bit when it says private cellular networks. You know, we've had private Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi is the private network. Yeah,
Wi-Fi is private network. We've had that for 20 years. So you know, they kind of, you know, present it as a big thing. And I understand it's not licensed spectrum and so on, but actually we've had private wireless, you know, for 20 years, 22 years.
Yeah, the concept. So
I kind of laugh sometimes.
Yeah. So it's a new thing. It's a new thing in cellular, and it's a very interesting one. And I'm very, you know, I do a lot of work on it. And it's a great thing. But the model we should think about is Wi-Fi rather than public cellular, because it's closer to that.
Right. You know, I've even heard this, I forget who it was actually. It was a 5G company of some sort, and they said, we want to make 5G as easy, you know, the 5G networks, as easy as installing a Wi-Fi network. Seriously, this was their, you know, punchline. And I got a kick out of that, saying, and you've got a ways to go, because it's actually I mean, Wi-Fi has had 20 years of, you know, developing an ecosystem that it's not just for professionals, but for, you know, IT people and not for PhDs, but for human beings. So a lot of this stuff works at a level where a lot of IT people, maybe not with a PhD or anything else, but can actually install these things, get them to work, and get a huge amount of use out of them, right? So yes, it should be as easy as Wi-Fi, but I kind of like the
fact
it's
that not. But it's not. It's actually, it's difficult for 5G to be or 4G to be as simple as Wi-Fi, because it is designed to be more complex.
Yes.
For good reason.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the difference between Wi-Fi and 5G, that from a technology point of view, it's not actually, they're not all that different, but they're meant to serve different networks.
The philosophy, you know, the architecture, it's a bit like apples and oranges, right? The whole question of, you know, to compare them, it really is, because the architecture is completely different. I mean, the philosophy behind them are completely different. They sometimes serve the same purpose, right? Or a similar purpose, right? This is true. But let me just actually, one of the things that I wanted to come back to is we're talking about determinism. This is a really, really, really important point in the Wi-Fi universe right now. And it's something, and it's a fine point. But determinism is something that we've not had to any great extent in Wi-Fi until Wi-Fi 6, because OFDMA provides some of that. What used to happen in Wi-Fi networks is that as you add more devices, the quality deteriorates of the connection deteriorates very, very quickly, right? So OFDMA and Wi-Fi, this was for Wi-Fi 6, What that did was you could actually maintain the quality, because OFDMA, as we know, is such a way that you can manage the spectrum in such a way that the quality of each individual connection does not go down, but it's maintained at least up to a certain point. So that was a degree of determinism there, similar to the kind of determinism that you have in mobile, right? Because some of the mechanisms are similar. So what has now happened with Wi-Fi 6E, and specifically with Wi-Fi 7, which is now, by the way, I should say, and I was not expecting this, the first Wi-Fi 7 router formally has been launched by H3C, the Chinese vendor, and was announced just a couple of weeks ago as well, and powered by Qualcomm and all of that. And I was not expecting it so soon. So of course, there are no devices yet, or at least no commercial devices.
Yeah, but it will happen.
Right. Yeah. But Wi-Fi 7, at least, the commercially available, I suppose, at some level, already now. But here's what Wi-Fi 7 does. It brings in, I'm going to throw this out, an order of magnitude more determinism, if that's a thing. So what I mean by that is you can now, in addition to be a lot faster, 320 megahertz channels in 4K QAM and all that, what we now have is our, it's called multi-link operation. And basically that's parallel streams, right? And different modes of operation, depending on, the device and so on. It's pretty complicated, multi-link operation. But basically what it means is that you have redundancy on your data link. So if there's something going on with one stream that doesn't work so well, you still got the other one, and you can actually create services by managing this that are deterministic, that will give you an SLA of 99 point whatever it is that you need. I mean, this is the target. I don't have this verified by study, but this is the principle, and I think this is what we're gonna. And the second thing in Wi-Fi 7 is that in addition to that, and of course in Wi-Fi 7 you already have OFDMA, all that stuff we had in Wi-Fi 6, because it builds on top of that. But you have MLO, the multiple parallel data streams essentially, and then you have something called puncturing, which actually what it means is that you can manage your spectrum. So if that you see that a certain part of your spectrum is not working well because there's interference, you can actually notch that piece of your operating spectrum out and not use it, which means, again, you've added to the determinism, the quality, the SLA that you can actually provide. So what's happening here is that these technologies have now compensated so much for the fact that it is unlicensed spectrum that I believe there's not going to be really any substantial difference had it been licensed spectrum, right? Yeah. Especially for Wi-Fi 7. Well, I think it's now so good, and it's not so good that you're not, even if it's unlicensed spectrum, that argument doesn't fly anymore with these technologies, because what you're going to get, because of the capabilities of the feature, is something that is so close to so close to licensed spectrum, it's not going to make any difference to you, even if it were licensed.
Yeah, no.
That's my. I posit this with you. I posit this with you.
Okay, so I'm actually somewhat okay, I agree with you with all the sort of like from a technology point of view, yes. However, there is always the question, and this is kind of comes to the nature of Wi-Fi, is that you want to share whatever you have, which is the reason why, this I just saw the recent estimate that in Wi-Fi you have the efficiency of the use of spectrum is over 30 times as much as mobile. So if you think about the bits per hertz, how much bits are actually transported, not in theory, in the real world, which is different. It's not it's the spectral efficiency of the technology, it's the spectral efficiency of the usage.
Yes.
Why is it so successful? It's not because it's better, but because it's shared. Now, when you share things, obviously there is an up and down because you have that kind of thing, but also you create situations where you have contention that is more difficult to manage, not from a technology point of view, but because there are different users. So if you decide what to do with everything, and I don't have a say, you do what you want. If we both have to do it, we have to negotiate. This is not a technology issue. It's just a usage issue, and you cannot have it both ways. Now, with Wi-Fi 6, it's less of an issue because you have so much bandwidth, but there is always going to be for Wi-Fi a situation where because you have so much demand, you can improve the way you manage it, but
Yeah.
you can't, it's just the physics. If everybody wants to use the same highway, no matter how good it is, there's going to be traffic.
No, you're right. I mean,
So
ultimately,
so
yes.
yeah,
Ultimately, yes.
okay, so
The
I
sharing is
think
going
that
to get you in the
yes,
end, is what
so
you're saying.
yes, so
But
I'm
yeah,
all
I
for
guess I
it,
agree with
but
that.
I think that there is an important difference to all of that, because when you get to 6 gigahertz, because you can and you have low power. Low power is a great thing, because that addresses the issue,
Yes.
because you cannot share as much, because if we both use it and we are sufficiently far away from each other, it's not
Yeah.
as if you have a license because nobody's around you.
Correct.
And then you can take advantage of all the deterministic features, because there's nobody around me. So
Nobody around.
effectively, it's
But
as if, you
right,
see what
yeah,
I'm
but
saying? So
yeah.
there is something. This is the reason why I think 6 gigahertz is so important, because it's actually the low power. It's the strength of it.
Yes, I
You see what I'm
totally
saying?
agree.
So but we also have to kind of think about the fact that not everywhere that's gonna,
Yeah, I agree with that. By the way, there's yet another level, right? There's something called very low power.
Yes.
And very low power is not quite kind of like for personal, wearable device networks kind of thing, right? Envisioned for that. And in fact, it's already a part of regulation in some countries, but it is actually, in fact, in some ways part of the regulation by the FCC. It just hasn't been finalized yet, as far as I understand.
Yes.
So but that's a big thing as well, because it has to do with your personal sort of immediate network on your body, if you like, right? To your phone and to maybe your glasses or whatever it is. So this is something that is also a Wi-Fi technology, which is called very low power. So we have to keep that in mind as well. It's an important one, but as I said, it hasn't really come out yet properly.
Yes,
but I mean, I think, in terms of the 5G Wi-Fi thing, and I also just want to say, a lot of folks, I mean, for the longest time, I think I was fairly critical of 5G, but I'm not actually. I think the 5G industry has to do well for wireless to do well. And in the mobile industry, do you know what I mean? I mean, the wireless industry in many ways is one industry. If wireless does well, devices do well, Wi-Fi thrives, and vice versa. It's not, nobody's an island, right? We all kind of work together. So, and I was critical of some of the 5G stuff. I was never really against it. What bothers me though, at the time, and this goes back a few years, is whenever I mean, this goes back to 3G, right? When the 3G or 4G or 5G people saying, oh, by the time we come out, Wi-Fi's game over. We're going to take over all of that, right? And that one, honestly, I can say from the Wi-Fi industry perspective, we have never disgraced ourselves. We've never claimed to take over the 5G world, of course, which would be ridiculous anyway. But I think it's also relatively ridiculous the other way around to have the 5G people.
I think there is an equal codependency here.
Yes,
because
exactly.
The same thing is that, if you're at home with Wi-Fi and then you go out of the door and you have no connectivity, that would suck too. So it's because we say Wi-Fi is everywhere. No, Wi-Fi is not everywhere. So
of course not. It's an indoor thing predominantly, right?
Right. And that's perfectly fine. But it's really the fact that you have the two of them, that they can take over from one to the other, and increasingly well. So you don't know whether you're on Wi-Fi or 5G or whatever most of the time. And you don't need to know that.
No, absolutely. And the Achilles heel, if you like, or if there is one, I mean, we've always been a little bit challenged with onboarding, right? As you know, right? I mean, there's a passpoint standard that some has been adopted to some degree, but still it really needs a big breakthrough in some sense. And so the interworking, if you like, or the convergence of these services is still not really in place. I mean, there are now some things going on with proprietary things that can manage connectivity. So we've had these things for a while, and there's some really good ones out now. And I think we will see more convergence and so on, but there are still some fundamental things that are not, very well adjusted yet, including Passpoint in a sense, not that it doesn't work, but it's like an ecosystem thing to have it everywhere and so on. And this is proven to be a challenge, right?
But it's getting better, but it's not perfect. I mean, and this is like, every technology has its own kind of gray areas.
Yeah.
That's fine. We
Yeah.
just need to work with it. Okay,
Yeah,
why don't we go to some of the questions? So we have
Okay, go for it.
another question is if there were IMT identification in region 1 for the upper 6 gigahertz, inevitable constraints necessary to allow coexistence means that the density of IMT base stations would be too sparse to be effective for users and importantly economical for MNOs. Not to forget that the constraints would most likely drive down revenue from auctions and hence making government less happy. And I'm not quite sure whether this is an argument for, I mean, I know what
I think this is what he's saying. It's not commercially viable, essentially.
Yes.
Even if they were, even if IMT was offered or mobile companies were offered the upper 6, I think every conclusion from any smart person that I've heard is the same. It's like, I mean, even if you could make it work, it wouldn't commercially be viable, and it would be something that's not very well suited in many ways to the way that the mobile industry works. It's just not a good. It's just not. It won't work well. So I agree with it.
Yeah, my argument is that as you go up higher in frequency, the advantage of having anything licensed decreases because it's the distance between the two. Well, actually, as the power goes down and the frequency goes up, then there is no need to have licensing. And in fact, what licensing would do is to dramatically reduce usage because this increases the barrier to entry. In the lower band, the lower part of the spectrum is different because you need licensing to provide mobility.
Yes,
there is no question about it.
Absolutely. That is absolutely clear also to me, and that yet another reason why I don't think it will be very valuable for them, even if they got it. And it doesn't make sense to give it to them. I really don't think it does.
Yeah.
By the way, the second question is really
good. The
last one, in many countries like Brazil, this is Jose Frauendorf. I'm guessing maybe it's a Brazilian.
Yeah, he's from Brazil. Yes,
he's from Brazil, and a very good comment here or question. In many countries like Brazil, Wi-Fi was used years ago as a distribution system for providing services in small cities. That was how small ISPs started providing the service, like wireless ISPs, I guess, right? Mm-hmm. After that, they migrated to fiber. Well, with Wi-Fi 6, do you think the story will happen again, emulating what 5G could be providing? Maybe not so much emulating what 5G can be providing, but yes, I think we are going to see more of that. And I think there are a number of things. There's a number of technical things. There are a number of spectrum related issues that are accumulating towards that scenario, right? One of them is Wi-Fi 6 actually has better range than we've ever had before. And that's as a result of FTM. And you don't get maybe the same data rate at the edge of the cell, but you get bigger cells. And that's a very useful thing. Also for things like IoT, for example. So there's that. In Brazil, they have allocated the full 1.2 gigahertz, but it's still for the indoor low power, as I understand it. So outdoor is not permitted yet. But let me give you an example, but that of course could change. Let me give you an example. And this is one of the points that I actually had on my list here that I wanted to mention. In the US, we've now started the process towards enabling outdoor 6 gigahertz. And that requires, Monica, you know about this, I'm sure. That requires something called AFC, automatic frequency coordination. And that is a database lookup scheme. Nothing technically difficult. It's a SaaS, it's in the cloud and whatever. That needs to be implemented. It's not officially, I think, confirmed or licensed, by the FCC. So the process is still ongoing to actually finalize this so that it can go commercial, but it will for sure. And that will allow standard power in the 6 gigahertz band. And the reason why the AFC is there is so that you don't interfere with if there would happen to be a utility near it, and then you can't use it. So there's a lookup, right? It's a bit like it's a simplified version of CBRS. It's a little bit, similar to that, or TV white space maybe is a better example.
Well, it's actually much easier than that, in the sense that, especially if you go to outside, like rural areas, the chances that you have a point-to-point link going where you want to go is less likely. And
so tiny.
So it's fixed, unlike CBRS where it's kind of like the users can go up and down. Right. There you know where the links are, so you know whether you can deploy or not. So it's actually what worries me, however, is the fact that, for instance, all the federal funding that we have now for rural is basically fiber.
That is changing.
No, they have a real. In fact, it's so bad that what they consider someone or a residence to be unserved if only they have satellite and wireless, which doesn't make any sense, right? Because the thing is that if you do that, everybody is served because everybody has satellite in a rural area.
Yes.
Which is true, which I think is so. We're spending a lot of money to put fiber. Now, once you have fiber, and fiber clearly is better than wireless. The question is that a good model, a sustainable model, or a meaningful model in rural areas? And I'm not so sure it is.
No, it's just not for the last mile, right?
Yeah. That's what I do. Yeah, like fiber to the home in rural areas. That's not a good way to spend money.
It's super expensive solution.
Yeah, just because the government has money to spend on it doesn't make it a good use for it. It's no good.
Right.
And
so what I wanted, I just want, but I know very good point, Monica. But what I wanted to say with my friend Jose from Brazil is that you should petition your government to allow standard. Look, I don't know. It's probably complicated. I don't know what it looks like in Brazil in terms of how this 6 gigahertz band is being used for utilities and whatnot. But the US model, and by the way, Canada is adopting this as well, and there will be other countries as well, where you have a database lookup to see, are you permitted to operate standard power outdoors in 6 gigahertz in this spot? And if you are, the utility of 6 gigahertz or 6E in this case, it should be, or Wi-Fi 7, it would be fantastic for something that this gentleman is proposing for villages, for example, right? Or even wider suburban areas and so on. But it does require that regulation, of course, because right now for Brazil, as far as I know, it's only indoor. But the potential is there. And I think once we see AFC implemented in the US and WISPs, right, being handed over, what is it? It's not the full thing. I think it's 600-700 megahertz, maybe. And don't quote me on that. I don't remember, but it's a big chunk of the 6 gigahertz that can run on standard power outdoor. We will see that. We will see WISPs, during this, I think, wholesale. I don't see why not, actually.
No, that's absolutely. Yeah, because there is a huge amount of areas in the country where, I've seen the maps of, where is it? There's just so much where it's really, it's underused. And that's the thing. Again, this is the issue. It's not just unlicensed, it's the sharing. Spectrum is something that we know how we're learning how to share it. CBRS is one, so it's really important. There's just so much spectrum out there. We need to learn to share it, and I think that's a one way to go.
100%. And as you say, I don't think they're in I don't know. I don't have the number, but if I was to guess, what is your risk of not being able to run outdoor standard? Outdoor and indoor, by the way. Indoor also, you still have to look at but standard power. Let's just say standard power, 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi. Will you be permitted to run that in any given location? My guess is in 1% of the cases you probably can't. In 99% of cases you probably can't, because this utilities use of it is sparse, right? It's
really sparse. Well, and also there is so much spectrum that even if they use a link, doesn't mean that they use the whole thing. So. Correct. If you're fine, I've seen the maps. It's not really a problem.
No, exactly.
It's just a question of coordinating in a way to ensure that you don't interfere.
Correct.
But otherwise, okay. So we have another question. It's about the traffic. Again, it's from Pasquale. 100% of the traffic is generated indoors, and a great majority of the time is on Wi-Fi, and that's the claim. Now, I would like to add. So it's very difficult to know how much traffic is generated indoors, but it's like 80 to 90%. I cannot quote a source, but I know a lot of people that have that data. Now, of what we consider fixed is like 90% of fixed, over 90% is Wi-Fi.
Yes.
Of what it is. And so, and the amount of traffic of mobile is like 5% of the overall traffic. So when you put that together, mobile is like, say something in the order of 5 to 3 to 10% of the traffic. Correct. So, but we always talk about 5G and mobile, and I think the reason for that it's because it's more tricky, it's more difficult, it's a little bit more complicated. That Wi-Fi, you just take it for granted, and off you go.
The mobile value proposition is still, of course, there in the big way, and also because it gives you freedom, right? That's the whole thing. It gives you freedom, and that's really always been the thing. It gives you ubiquitous coverage, and that's really the value. And you can go wherever you want practically these days, with your phone, and it'll work to some extent, right? So that's the really big thing. What I did think was, a complete miss and a total shot in the dark. It was, this millimeter wave to the device 5G concept. And I always said from the beginning, who in the name of X, would, how would that work? How would that ever work? You want to mark an X on the pavement where you're supposed to stand when you get your millimeter wave to your millimeter wave device data stream? This is not going to work. I mean, anybody who knows a little bit of physics, you can't create coverage. That's the problem with these. So yeah, for backhaul, sure, and to the home and all that, yeah, all that is fine. But as a technology to the device, never made any sense to me. And of course, there's a lot of marketing around this, and some companies did it, and I thought, goodness me, when are they going to wake up? But anyway.
But look, I mean, I think that actually is the answer. I mean, or a potential competitor to even Wi-Fi, because indoor millimeter wave, I think it's actually potentially very good. I mean, because outdoor, as you said, it's just like, there are some places outdoors where that works. Highly.
But even indoor millimeter wave, I mean, it's been around for a while, also in 60 gigahertz.
Yeah, 60.
There are certain applications, backhaul applications, 100%. I'm totally with you. And we even have, at Wi-Fi now, we have a very dear client to us that we're working with for, since they started. It's called Airvine.
Yeah.
You know that? Airvine,
yes, I love that. I love that proposition, as a matter of fact.
Amazing company. And I think, I told them we do a lot of work with them and for them, and we think they're going to go be massive. So anyway, but that's just an example, but it's all backhaul, right? To the device, I think, way back, ASUS had like what was called a Y-gig phone at the time, and it actually worked, but it never really did anything.
No, I know. This is a personal disappointment, because I'm a great believer in the 60 gigahertz and all the millimeter wave, but what I think it's going to be.
But backhaul, you agree with, right? Backhaul.
No. But also for access, and I think that it's just not. It might take a little bit of time. If you remember, when we got 2.5, mobile operators said we cannot use 2.5. It's just too high frequency. The same thing happened with 3.5 for a long time, right? And now they want to use 6 gigahertz, no problem. So I think that the way we think about it
changes a lot.
It's really changing. But then again, I think that sort of going back to the Pasquale's point is that clearly most of the traffic goes through Wi-Fi. Now, it might be debatable, but it's clearly most of the traffic. But at the same time, you cannot just say the value on a per bit per hertz. It's really important to understand the logic behind it. But the value of a bit over mobile is much higher than a bit over Wi-Fi at home.
Absolutely.
Because of the fact that you are out there and you're trying to figure out where to go, and you need the map to tell you where to go. It's really.
I think I agree with that. I think I agree with it. And that value will always be there to some extent.
Yeah.
I mean, that freedom aspect is incredible, and that will always be there. But there's one. I know that we don't have so many minutes left. There's one thing I wanted to mention, Monica, and I want your feedback as well, because I think you'll like this, and I don't know if you know about this, because I don't think it's necessarily well known yet. But there are some activities among certain Wi-Fi vendors that are improving location-based services technology.
Oh yes.
Did you hear about this?
The sensing one. Or
no, not sensing, but actually, I'll tell you how this works. It is there is a specific vendor. Okay, it happens to be Aruba Networks, but I think it's gonna probably spread to everybody else. Right? Because I think everybody will have it relatively soon. They have now put GPS, a specific kind of GPS receiver in all their APs, or the new APs. And what they have done, and this is something remarkable, and if you ever get anybody on the show that, here's a recommendation. There's a gentleman at HPE, I'll tell you who he is. He will come on the show and tell you everything about it, because this is something that's going to be a big change. What they have done is that they've always, let me start somewhere else. There's always been a problem with indoor Wi-Fi location-based services because it's never worked to the right resolution. It's not, you can do it within a couple meters or 5 meters, but it's never been accurate enough to be useful. So even stuff like wayfinding, which is in theory, relatively simple. It's not worked so well, or finding an item on a shelf in a store, for example. It's not worked particularly well because you need, set up beacons. I mean, you can get it to work. It's not that you can't, but it's tricky, right? And it has been proprietary, there's been all kinds of things, and it's not been a mass market proposition. Now, what has been done is the architecture for this has changed. The architecture has changed so that now what you can get is with GPS and something else called, with GPS to create the grid, right? The absolute positioning.
Right.
Every AP now has the ability to know exactly where it is on the GPS coordinates. This was not possible before, because if you had deep indoor coverage, you wouldn't have a GPS signal. Now they've made it into a kind of a mesh network, so all the APs now know where they are. This is the first thing.
So basically, hold on. So that basically the AP knows where they are, but so that you know where the devices are relative to the AP. I mean, that's the, because otherwise
that's right.
It's the combination of the two that it's
and then
important.
There's one. That's a combination, exactly. You're actually exactly right, and you're jumping a little bit ahead of me, because the second piece is what's called fine time measurements. And fine time measurements is a Wi-Fi standard. It's existed for a long time. It's actually in the devices, but it's not really been used for much because there were other issues, because we didn't really have an application for them. Now, with those two things, you can actually pinpoint the location of something using Wi-Fi within 10, 20 centimeters. This is where we're at now. This is new. We could never do this. This is new because of the architecture that changed. It changed a couple of months ago. This is totally fresh. So this is completely new, and it's a big deal in my universe, because what it means is that essentially you can now, in principle, go to Google Map, right? And you can explode the view, and you can expand it, and you can get to the shelf level at Walmart. Yes, right? This is the potential of this. At the shelf level at Walmart, you can say your thing is there, and you can wayfind down to 10 centimeters if you. This is where we're at, and this is something. As I'm saying, it's something that's just come out. So, and I know not many people know about it, but this is going to change the whole location-based services industry, I think.
Yeah, and then and there is going to be similar thing in there are similar thing in 5G. So we're going to be using, I think that's a new way a new dimension for the apps, because we have some sort of
absolutely
location thing, but not quite. But actually, okay, but so this is the other thing that I think that is not getting enough air time, is the RF sensing that you can do with Wi-Fi, which is which is different, but it's really it's a great. To me, it's genius, because basically you're using the RF signal as a radar.
There's a couple of ways, right? That one way is using it as radar, but the way that I think is somewhat more common is simply having, it's passive, that you don't actually send anything out. You basically you listen for little disturbances on the Wi-Fi signals that are already there. So right. What
I mean is, as a radar, in the sense that you're sort of piggyback on what already is there. So the marginal cost is zero, because you have that. You use the RF signal to know what's going on.
Exactly.
And you think about how many IoT applications are there, so that you know what's happening, say for instance in your home or whatever, and it's better than camera, because you don't have to see people. There is the privacy issue is different.
Exactly right.
And there is no marginal cost to do it, because the signal is already there. I think that right now it's not really used all that much, but potentially it's just like, it's a huge thing.
Sure, I have
fascinating too.
Oh, for sure. I have a couple of clients that are I would argue market leaders in this area, and there's a number of things, psychological things, as you said. This sensing technology is not a camera. So, for example, if you have, one of the things that many of them are working on right now is, for example, elderly care, right?
Yes, so, exactly.
Right. So, for example, seniors not big fans of having cameras pointed at them all the time in their room. Who would want that anyway? I wouldn't want that, nor would they.
No.
Right? So they're not big fans, and then which means something else has to be here. So even within the given whatever Wi-Fi access points you may have, you can have the sensing, and you can see, okay, my mother, elderly mother, she stood up, she got out of bed at this time, at that level, and she moved into that room at that time, and and so that you can kind of keep a sort of gentle eye a little bit on, and a lot of parents, probably elderly parents, probably okay with that, but the
Yeah.
camera, forget it. So there's that kind of application. I have got another client, very clever company as well, that has managed to detect falls, actually detect when people fall over and hit the floor.
Yeah.
And they can do this with a great degree of certainty that this has happened. And then of course you can, the alarms and whatnot. So there's some really, really good applications. And I think we're only just scraping the surface of this as well. I mean, there's really potential for Wi-Fi sensing, and it's becoming like a little industry in its own right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think that's I'm very excited about it, because it's like, it's there, it's free.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just
There's a little bit of software
marketing.
involved,
It's
but
like,
basically you don't have to, no installation required, basically, right?
yeah, I mean, maybe you want to put another access point, but that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, we know how to deal with
Pretty
that.
true.
So
Yeah.
anyway, we're at the top of the hour. We could go on for another couple of hours, I
We
think.
could
So
easily.
anyway, so well, thank you so much, Klaus. It was a pleasure talking to you, and thank you all in the audience. And we'll hand it over to Kendra again.
Great, thanks, Monica. That will conclude our webinar for today. Thanks again to our speakers and for our great questions and comments from the audience. You will find a recorded version of today's webinar at sensophily.com in the coming days. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.